Learning and development has never had more data, more technology, or more ways to build learning experiences. Yet many of the decisions we make are still driven by habit, assumptions, or practices that simply haven't accept advanced over time. In this episode of Modern Learning on the Air, I'm going to be talking with Dr. Will Thalheimer about what it means to build evidence based learning practice. From learning myths and evaluation to AI and business impact, Will challenges us to rethink not just what we do, but why we do it. If you've ever wondered whether we're measuring the right things or simply the easiest things, this conversation is for you. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, David.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I always enjoy talking to you. Throughout your career, you've challenged many of the assumptions our profession has accepted for years. What first drew you to becoming what some people might call L&D's friendly skeptic?
Well, first of all, thank you for putting the friendly in front of the skeptic. Appreciate that. Not everybody does that. I don't know. It's probably some mental defect. I can't help myself. I don't know. I mean, I think we work in a important profession. I entered the field. Actually, I remember thinking when I was like 25, I was sort of a lost young man and thinking, well, what should I do with my life? What's life about? And I realized that, well, learning is really important. It enables civilizations, it enables people to get along, et cetera. So I decided to focus on that. And even today, the work we do in the L&D field, we're helping people in their current jobs, in their careers, with their confidence, their sense of identity. And that has good effects for them personally and for their family finances, community, et cetera. And we're helping the organizations we work for to thrive and survive. So that's good stuff. So if we're doing good stuff, shouldn't we do it well? And so, if we see something that it isn't working as well as we'd like it to work, shouldn't we say something? I mean, I think it just comes down to that.
Yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit because you mentioned you in what you were just sharing there that you were 25 and you kind of lost soul. Tell me, I mean, I'm very familiar. You and I know each other well. I'm familiar with the work that you do, but some of our listeners may not be that familiar with it. What brought you to be this friendly skeptic that our industry counts on today? Well, tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how you got to this point in your career.
I was a young man. I got a degree in psychology, and then I tried a few jobs and they didn't work out. And then I decided to get an MBA, and I'm in MBA school, Master's of Business. And I'm thinking this business stuff is fine, but it doesn't jazz me, And so there was a course. I was at Drexel University in Philadelphia. There was a 4-course sequence on instructional design. I said, oh, maybe I'll take a course in that. And I loved it and got interested in that. And then I'm looking for a job after my time in the school, and I'm looking through Training Magazine. And I'm thinking to myself, I'd love to combine my business background with the learning stuff, and simulation seems the way to go. And there it was on the page, an advertisement for the world leaders in business simulation. And I said, wow, this is great. I want to work for them. Where are they located? They were 4 blocks from my house.
Wow.
West Philadelphia. And so I put on my one suit, went down there the next day, walked in and said, hey, I want to work for you. They go, what? They said, well, we're too busy today. Come back tomorrow. Anyway, I got a job there, and that's how I got started in the field. I was doing instructional design. First project was developing an MBA in a box, multimedia kind of audio tapes. And, we had a simulation in there. I did that for a few years, and then I decided that if I really wanted to do good work, I should maybe go get a PhD. So I went and got a PhD in human learning and cognition from Columbia, came back out in the field, was looking for a job again. And SMG called me back, said, hey, Will, we want you to run our leadership development product line. I said, great. Yeah, I'll do it. So did that for a few years and then decided, what the field needs is for us to, sort of combine the research side and the practice side. There's wisdom in both camps, but often we're not talking to each other. And I thought, well, I could do that. And started doing that. And I think it was 1998. So, then I went out on my own as a consultant, helping people build more effective learning interventions based on the learning sciences. Along the way, I got interested in evaluation and presentations and did work on those things as well. So been around a long time. It was over 4 decades now.
I've always appreciated about the work that you do, Will, is you challenge what learning professionals think we know. Because a lot of the stuff that we do, we apply pretty broadly in our industry, despite the fact that it's based on things that may not necessarily be evidence based, or maybe in some cases be untrue. And I'd like to ask you a couple of questions related to that. So there are a lot of myths, as an example, within our field, a lot of myths that people apply their practice to. Why do you think a lot of these learning myths persist, even after some people like you and others have shared research that debunks it, but we still persist in following these myths? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think it's human nature. We all think from what we know. Daniel Kahneman once said that what you see is all there is.
Sure.
And I think what you know is all there is for us as well. And so if we've done something for a long time, if it has face validity, if it seems to be useful, like the learning styles thing, right?
Hmm.
So this is largely debunked now. Most people are, know to be skeptical. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's like, well, this makes sense, right? Different, everybody's different.
Hmm.
We should probably make sure we cater to different people's different ways of learning. And that seemed to make sense. Turns out it doesn't work very well, but so it just sort of like has face validity. We keep going with it. And I do think that this debunking has had benefits. It's certainly not out, it's not completely effective, but certainly has benefits. It has had benefits over time. Now, one of the things that happens in our field that we really ought to step back and know is that we have new people entering our field all the time. I'm sure you know this as a former conference organizer. You got new people every year come to the conferences. And I don't think we've done a great job in general educating these folks, right? So everybody has to relearn everything all the time. And so somebody puts out an idea that seems good. Wow, yeah, that seems really good. And so we run with it. Yeah, but I don't think our field is the only one that has this issue. This it's sort of endemic. It's human nature. So
Yeah. Well, and you've done a lot of work exploring these areas that can help improve our practice. What are some of the assumptions that you still see organizations make that concern you the most?
well, I mean, we still think that teaching more content is
Hmm.
good.
Yep.
When that's a problem because we know that learners need supports when they learn. They need practice, they need reflection, they need, time to think about it differently, they need repetitions. But if you are going to provide all those things, you're going to have less content. But we still think content, content, content. We don't push back on our SMEs when they say, oh no, they have to know this too. So that's one thing. There's one big thing that really I think we should be aware of or worry about, and that is we in L&D tend to grovel too much. We tend to be subservient to our business stakeholders. And, obviously we're working in a ecosystem where, we're not in charge, but at the same time, there's some solid principles that we have. There's things that we know that we ought to be strong about. We ought to, be assertive about. Don't everybody go get themselves fired, but don't be a jerk, do it gently. Maybe you can't win this battle, but maybe next time. But, it's like, I like to use the metaphor of an architect. A business person goes to an architect, says, hey, listen, we want you to build a building at a 45-degree angle and you can only go 20 feet into the soil. And what's the architect going to do? He says, well, no way am I building a building like that. It's not going to stand up no matter what I do. And it's going to kill people. It's going to be dangerous. And as an architect, I'm ethically obligated to not do this for you. And so, most of our work is not life and death. Some is, but most of it isn't. But still, we have certain foundational principles and we ought to be a little bit stronger about them. And there's other assumptions as well. Like I'm a big learning evaluation guy these days. So, the assumption is that you can survey and know enough about your learning program. And surveys aren't good enough. And measuring butts and seats, attendance, completion rates, that's not good enough. And doing low level knowledge checks, that's not good enough. But we continue to do those things. So there's a whole bunch of little things like that it's just helpful to be aware of them and think, oh, well, maybe that's not the way to go.
Yeah. And I think that there's a linkage between those two things, because I think part of the reason that a lot of training organizations and learning organizations are treated like order takers. I haven't heard the verb grovel used before, but I like it. Part of the reason that they have that dynamic is because they can't tell their story well. They don't measure things well, and they can't tell the impact of what they're doing. And I know you've done a lot of work in that space. So that's where I want to pivot our conversation to. So when we come back from our break, we'll explore what happens when you stop measuring just what's easy, those butts in the seats metrics, and start asking what evidence actually helps us make better decisions and helps us drive our business. So we'll jump into that conversation when we come back after our break.
You've got the knowledge, the expertise, but turning that into effective, engaging training, that's another skill entirely. At InSync Training, we take your content and transform it into learner-focused, interactive, and results-driven programs without the guesswork. Our instructional designers are experts in structuring training that's clear and engaging, designing interactive virtual, hybrid, and blended learning experiences, and developing training that sticks. So your employees don't just learn, they apply. Stop struggling with training that misses the mark. Let's design something that works. Schedule a consultation today.
Welcome back. So for the next part of our discussion, I want to talk about the work that you're doing around measurements. Now, organizations often say they want to prove impact. Do you think that's actually the right goal, or should we be thinking differently about the purpose of measurement when it applies to learning?
Sometimes that's the right goal. Absolutely. What I think we get wrong is to think that we should only measure impact. And the problem with just measuring impact is that we're ignoring all the learning factors that influence our work, that we have leverage over. I'm a big believer that when we design our evaluation practices, we should think about, well, what decisions are these evaluation practices going to help us make? In fact, why don't we start there? Let's forget the models. Let's think about what decisions do we in L&D have to make, and then build our evaluation practice backwards from those to help us make those decisions. Now, if we focus only on impact, let's think about the things we're missing. There's a whole bunch of things we know we need to do to be successful. We need good content. It's got to be valid, relevant, credible. Learners have to pay attention to it in a way that helps them learn, not just that they're engaged, but they actually can support their thinking about it. They need to be able to comprehend the information fully. They need to be motivated to apply it. They need to be able to remember it. They need to be able to overcome obstacles when they try to apply it. Think of all these things that we're not measuring if we just focus on impact. Ideally, we'd measure both things, but sometimes we have to be real. Our evaluation costs money. It takes time, and so we have to prioritize. But if we only measure impact, the problem is we're not looking at the leverageable learning factors that enable us to create those cycles of improvement.
One of the things I've always appreciated about your work is, and one of the biggest contributions that I've appreciated, is that you've kind of changed the conversation or helped push the conversation forward around evaluation, as we've been discussing, even going as far as creating a new model that people can follow, LTEM. Tell me a little bit about LTEM and what problem you were trying to solve when you created it.
Yeah. So LTEM stands for the Learning Transfer Evaluation Model, and it was originally published in 2018 in the 11th version. It's now in version 13, very solid version, just published a year ago or so. So I was trying to solve the problem that we already talked about. In evaluation, what do we tend to do? We measure attendance, completion rates, butts in seats, poor designs of our learner surveys, and low-level knowledge checks. So that's a problem if we're measuring things that aren't as valuable as they might be. In essence, what I was trying to do is to bring some learning wisdom back into the learning evaluation work that we do. We need to, one of the things that LTEM does, for example, is instead of just having a tier for knowledge, there's also a tier for decision-making and task performance. So we know that if people can make decisions and they can actually do tasks, that's a much better indicator of whether they're actually going to be able to do work and make good decisions in the workplace. So we ought to focus on those kind of things. And also LTEM reminds us of things like, hey, you know that people forget. And so if you measure somebody when everything's top of mind for them, that's not going to tell us whether they're likely to remember. So we have to be reminded about measuring after delay, for example. So in essence, I was trying to bring some wisdom from the learning sciences into our evaluation practices.
And it's a very useful tool that I encourage people to check out. We'll put a link into the comments for that if you want to check out more on that. When I talk to organizations about why they aren't doing a better job in their evaluation and their measurement, I hear things like, well, we have a data issue. We don't have access to the data to tell our story. Or I hear people saying that, well, we have a lot of data, but we don't know what sort of evidence actually matters or what story to tell. Which are one of those, do you see one of those as having greater weight to our industry? Is there something else that you think is a challenge that we need to be addressing that can help organizations tell their story better?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we do that is really not doesn't make sense is we use a survey to measure everything. So we use a survey to measure knowledge. Like we use a survey to measure, can you make decisions? We use a survey to say, hey, do you think you're able to do this? We use a survey. Are you going to put this into practice? Well, surveys can give us some good information. I have a whole book on how to write performance focused learner surveys, but it's crazy what we do. We say, hey, yeah, we measured behavior on the job. Well, how'd you do that? Well, we gave a survey to the learners during the learning. Well, that doesn't make sense. So it's human nature to measure what's easy to measure, right? It costs money to measure better. And so our organizations tell us, no, we don't want to invest in that. So we do the best we can. And we say, well, okay, we'll have a survey. We ought to use good surveys, but we ought to push beyond surveys where we can. I'm a big believer in scenario questions. If you write a good scenario question that differentiates between those who can make decisions and those who can't, that's really powerful. And then you can validate them. You can put one on a pre-test, one on a post-test, one on a delayed post-test. Then you can tell whether your learning is actually making a difference. It's also good for learning. If you write good scenario questions, you can help the learners learn. I mean, we know that people learn by thinking things deeply through and giving people realistic context. They have to sort of sort through it. What's important to focus on this? And then they make a good decision. That's really helpful. So, yeah, I think it's a real missed opportunity. We don't write more scenario questions.
And I love that example because it speaks to one of the frustrations that I personally have in the way that our industry sometimes looks at evaluation is it's something that a lot of people in our field think about as a post implementation thing. We finished the program, now let's evaluate it. And I don't think that serves us well. If organizations started thinking differently about measurement and evidence from the beginning of a project, how would that change the way they might design a learning experience in the first place? I think scenarios is a great example of that. Other ways that it could affect the design.
Yeah, well, I think it's really right. One of the things I preach is don't, ignore the E at the end of Addy, put the E at the beginning, So what that does for you, and I'll tell you a story about somebody who did their doctoral dissertation using LTEM. But first, let me lay this out. So if you start with a solid evaluation framework that gets you thinking about learning and learning evaluation in a healthy way, right? You start brainstorming, well, what can we measure? Well, we should probably measure decision making. That's really important. We should probably measure whether people can actually complete tasks where we can, where we can get the permission and the funds to do this. We should probably measure behavior on the job. If you start out your project saying, these are the things we're going to measure, then you on the learning team are going to go, well, wait a minute, we're going to be measured on decision making. Our success is measured on whether we can help people make good decisions. Whoa, we better give people a lot of decision making practice. And we know from the learning sciences, well, that's like one of the best things you can do to support learning. So if you start with good evaluation, you're pushing yourself to a higher level. In the old days, we would start with learning objectives, and we were told use action verbs. The learners will be able to describe or list or explain. Those are so low level. They're not authentic. They're not job related, right? They're so academic and separated from the real world of the work. But if we start with good evaluation where we're thinking, well, these are the things we could measure. Even if you brainstorm some of the things you might measure and you can't measure them because the organization doesn't give you permission, even brainstorming those things gets you to think more authentically about what you're trying to do in the learning. So the story I'll tell is Elham Arabi, who's now Dr. Elham Arabi, was doing her doctoral dissertation in a hospital setting, nurse professional development. And she had two hypotheses. She said, if I introduce LTEM to a learning team, they'll do better learning evaluation. Well, that's not surprising. It's an evaluation framework. But she also said, if I introduce LTEM to a learning team, because LTEM hints at some good learning design things, that they'll do better learning design as well. And that's what she found in her dissertation. When introducing LTEM and these ideas about good evaluation design, people got thinking about, oh, we should do better in our learning design practices as well. So I think it's critical to start from the beginning, focusing on things that really matter.
Excellent. And one of the things you said earlier that resonates with me is when you were talking about LTEM, the different versions of it, that it's up to, I think you said version 13 becoming that, which speaks to the fact that it's updated. It's evolving with the field, because the field does evolve over time. And as we go to our last break and when we come back, I want to continue that theme. I want to look ahead to, because the field is evolving, and it's evolving at a rapid pace right now. We're going to have to talk about AI a little bit. But as AI and other forces of change are reshaping the future of work, they're reshaping our profession. What becomes even more important during this period of evolution that we're going through? And when we come back from our break, we're going to explore that. So stay with me.
A virtual session can go wrong in seconds. Tech issues, awkward silences, distracted learners, it all adds up to a training disaster. But at InSync Training, our expert virtual producers don't just keep things running, they elevate your sessions. We handle the tech, troubleshoot issues, and keep things on track. We support facilitators so they can focus on delivering great content. We manage breakout rooms, live polls, and interactions seamlessly. If training is critical to your business, production should be too. So let's talk. Schedule a free consultation today.
Welcome back. All right, so Will, I want to turn our focus towards the future, and we are going to talk a little bit about AI. I've noticed that you, in your commentary online, seem to be cautiously optimistic about AI, which I appreciate. Where do you think the profession is going on this? Are there areas where maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves as it relates to the disruptions shaped by AI?
I am cautiously optimistic. I've used AI to good effect.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have to, sometimes coach my AI tool to do better. But I found in a number of different instances, it's very valuable. I've done a lot of thinking about AI for learning evaluation, more so than learning design. I have heard about people using it to write scenarios or, help them design courses. And I have a little bit of skepticism about that unless you're very careful. The internet is filled with great stuff and crappy stuff, and AI is built on the internet. And so, you might get what you pay for. So, but in terms of evaluation, there's some clear wins that are very easy. Like one is, in the past, we've had this problem. When we survey, we love to ask an open-ended question, but we have a hard time processing the data. We have to sort of look at it, and, we're probably biased when we go in there and, finding what we want to find. But now we can have AI do an analysis of our open-ended responses. So that's like a clear win. The other thing is, data analysis. Most of us don't want to do any data analysis. Most of us don't do any data analysis on our learning evaluation, which is not necessarily bad. If you can eyeball numbers and see differences, that's probably more important than having a p-value, right? But I think there's some opportunities with AI and evaluation where we can enable it to create scenarios that are sort of interactive. And I haven't experimented with this yet, but I've seen other people talk about it. So I think that's a real opportunity that we ought to figure out, because it sort of takes the strength of AI and also aligns with what we know about human performance, right? So humans don't perform in the real world like they perform on a test or a quiz.
Right.
The more you can make it authentic, potentially the higher fidelity results you'll have.
A lot of the AI discussions that are going on today, even some of the examples that you shared just now around taking that learner feedback and pulling out the insights from it and doing the data analytics, speak to efficiency, speak to a lot of the stuff that we do today as humans, doing it more efficiently and having the machines do that. There's always wrapped around that value proposition a little bit of a fear with certain people of are the machines going to replace us? So as we start using AI to do a lot of the rote tasks in learning, such as what we described, even creating content, that seems to be the lowest hanging fruit right now. What are the human capabilities that become even more valuable as we start to harness the efficiencies that AI is going to give us?
Well, I think one of the worries is that AI will enable the best of us to do good work and hurt those of us that are newer to the field or, less skilled in replacing us, right? And so that's a problem. So how do the young people, how do the new people to our field, how do they get better if AI is doing all their tasks? Well, they don't get better. That's a real problem. I don't know how to solve that, but something we ought to be watching out for. Yeah, there's so many ethical issues involved here. They're much bigger than me, and I try to think about them, but I can't wrap my head around them. Yeah,
Difficult to wrap your head around. I totally agree. I mean, I've had my eye on a similar problem. It's bigger than L&D. It's got L&D aspects to it, but that apprentice level of work, like where does that get built? I mean, there's a lot of work that I do right now. I'm using a lot of agents to do work for me that is scaling some of the independent work that I'm doing, but I'm able to use those agents effectively because I have lived experience that enables me to oversee the work that they're doing and
yeah,
apply the discernment to match the goals that I have. But I can only do that because I have that lived experience that enables me to do that. What happens to the next generation? I don't know what the problem is, but it's a question that I definitely have my eye on because it's something that we need to be tracking as L&D professionals, I think.
yeah, and I've seen the exact same thing. I've been building a AI tool to help write scenario questions and help give feedback on scenario questions. And as I'm having a conversation with Claude, right, I'm realizing, wow, most people wouldn't be able to have this conversation. They wouldn't know when to push back. They wouldn't know what focuses to give Claude to look at. So I do worry about, there's that what you know is all there is. So anybody can go to an AI and they come out with something that looks good, but is it good? I mean, that's the thing. One of the things that I've learned over the years, you mentioned LTEM improving. I didn't improve it on my own. I got lots of help. I got people like learning experts like Clark Quinn, Julie Dirksen. I got evaluation experts like Rob Brinkerhoff, Ingrid Guerra-Lopez, El Hammurabi, and a whole bunch of really smart practitioners to give me feedback and make it better. And, help me overcome my blind spots. So I think we're going to have to work the same way with AI. Don't do it alone. Get other people involved, people from different perspectives, different levels of skills, et cetera.
AI is just one of the things that's evolving with our field, and I want to shift gears a little bit to an evolution that I've seen in your work. And recently, some of your works has shifted towards helping executives better understand the role learning has within their organization. What do you think learning leaders need to do differently if they want to be viewed as strategic business partners by the executives of their organizations?
Yeah. So my most recent book is called The CEO's Guide to Training, E-Learning, and Work, Empowering Learning for a Competitive Advantage. So in that book, I write as if I'm writing to a CEO. But the book is not just for senior leaders, it's for us as well. And what I tell the senior leaders is, hey, we have a lot of really smart people in L&D. We have a lot of good practices. There's research to show that training works. But I also say, hey, there's some warning signs too. Like one of the things, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, we do terrible with evaluation. And sometimes we try to prove to you that we're doing good work. And you probably would rather us invest that limited L&D evaluation budget into us getting better at what we do as opposed to proving to you. So, yeah. So I think that one way to reach the business side is to talk competitive advantage. And, the simple example I give is, okay, you got two learning teams, right? Maybe you're in the same industry, different organizations, same industry. You got two learning teams. One is using the learning sciences and using retrieval practice and the spacing effect, feedback and context alignment, and they're getting 100% improvement in learning results. People helping their learners remember 100% more. That's double than the other learning team. So who's going to have a competitive advantage? Well, clearly, if the learners are taking twice as much back to their workplace, then one team's going to have a significant competitive advantage. So that's the kind of thing that's going to resonate with business folks. And one of my messages in the book is, hey, there's some practices that we in L&D can do that would be better for us. Better evaluation. This book, I have 50 chapters in the book. They're really short. Most of them are just 2 pages long. At the back of the book, there's all these chapter notes if you want to go into detail. But just, I try to keep it straightforward and simple. And so of these 50 chapters, 6 are related to learning evaluation because it's so important. I think I have a quote in there, something like, bad evaluation is the root of all evil in L&D or something like that. But yeah, just trying to really help. I think one of the problems we have is that senior leaders don't understand what we do. And that's normal. That's not their job, right? Training budgets are like, I forget, it's like 0.25% of a typical Fortune 500 company. 0.25%, that's nothing. So you don't expect your CEO to need to know about training and development, but if they knew just a little bit more, they'd be able to manage us better, push resources in the right direction, nudge us in better directions. And we, on the other hand, should think about, well, what can we do to make us more effective, to create that competitive advantage? By leveraging some of these things, then we're going to have more credibility and we're going to have more impact. So it seems like a win-win to me.
I agree. Well, I always enjoy talking with you. You share such great insights, and I count on them, as I know many people in our field do, to inform our practices. And I described you at the start of our discussion as the friendly skeptic. I'm going to ask you to put that skepticism aside as we close here and put on your optimist's hat. What gives you the most optimism as you think about the future of L&D?
Well, we've proven that we can make improvements. Number one, the learning sciences were nowhere 25 years ago, right? They were just, people weren't talking about them. People weren't thinking about retrieval practice and spacing and all these things. We were talking about energy in the classroom and stuff like that. And so we clearly showed improvement. So if we can continue that trajectory, that's great. I think we have a lot of passionate people. I've been around for a while. You've talked to people. We care, so that gives me a lot of optimism. And we're also coming together. There's more and more conversations about how to do things better. And I think it's the power of the togetherness. If you're a change champion, you're going to burn yourself out if you're out there on your own. But if you find other people that say, hey, we got to do better. How do we do this? What can be, what have you seen work? Oh, can I try that? Yeah, that works as well. And I see, a lot of good communities that have crept up over the years. So, yeah.
I always like to end these conversations with something small and practical, because some people can listen to a conversation like this, and especially if they're new and they haven't started down this road, it can feel overwhelming. So if every person who is listening to this conversation chose to adopt one small evidence-based practice tomorrow, what would you recommend they do?
Okay, so I'm gonna give 2 things.
You're going to cheat. I love it.
I know. Hey, it worked for Captain Kirk, so there's an illusion that shows my age. Okay, so number 1, don't just focus on learning. Focus on helping people remember. Right? If you just help people learn and they forget, we haven't done much. So there's a bunch of learning science stuff we can do. So retrieval practice, spaced repetitions over time, simulating things, all great stuff. And so help people remember. And number 2, do better learning evaluation. If you create better learning evaluation, you're going to learn more. That's going to help you in your career, number 1. So you can do it for a selfish reason. And number 2, you're creating those virtuous cycles of continuous improvement. So those 2 things, help support remembering and do better learning evaluation, and you're on your way.
Excellent. That's some great advice for us to close the conversation. Well, I always enjoy talking to you. In our discussion here, I'm reminded about some of the reasons I follow you. You invite people in our industry to challenge the assumptions that we make around our practices, especially as it relates to evaluation. You remind us that everything that we're doing with measurement is to allow us to make better decisions are associated with learning and how to supply the business. And most importantly, everything that we do and the evidence, the reason that you lean heavily into the evidence-based practice, it exists to improve human performance and to help people, which I love. So thank you for being our guest today, and thank you for all the work that you do with the L&D field.
Well, and I will turn that back on you. Thank you for all your work and effort, and thanks for inviting me today. Appreciate
Always
it.
a pleasure. And to our listeners, if today's conversation challenged the way you think about learning measurement, take a look at how you're defining success in your own programs. Are you collecting data because it's available or because it helps you make better decisions? And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to Modern Learning on the Air for more discussions at the intersection of learning, leadership, and performance. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning into Modern Learning on the Air. For all your training and services needs, visit us at insynctraining.com. And don't forget to sign up for our monthly webinars, where we cover key topics and trends in the learning and development space. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.